Okay, so before we begin about legal updates on the real estate overview and buying properties and taxation in Cambodia, I'll give a brief overview of my law firm. P&A Asia established in 2012. We have office recently in New York and also Cambodia and Seychelles. Myself, I'm registered with New York Bar and Cambodian Bar. Okay, so regarding the legal qualifications to buy property in Cambodia, in 2011, the government created a law on foreign ownership on co-owned building. This law basically allows foreigners to own up to 70% of the units in a development. In 2010, the government created a law that allowed for condo developments because due to sales to local was not enough. In 2011, they created the law that allowed foreigners to purchase property. The co-owned building or condo is freehold, meaning it is a title deed registered with the Ministry of Land. It's in a form of strata title deed. It would have the word certificate of ownership written at the top. This title deed can be mortgaged, can be put in a hypothec. What all of the banks in Cambodia is recognized as a collateral. Does not disappear no matter what happens. So I had a question from one of the audience also regarding what type of properties can foreigners buy in Cambodia. The main and foremost is, of course, condominiums. You can own freehold. Other types of property that foreigners can buy would be leasehold, 50 years, added to another 50 years. Foreigners cannot currently own landed properties unless you apply for citizenship. For landed properties, however, foreigners can own up to 49% of the shares in a company which owns land. This is a little different from Myanmar, where foreigners cannot own shares at all if that company owns land. In many cases, foreigners can cooperate with locals to purchase land, to do development projects, agriculture-based. There's been a lot of interest from Singaporean businesses entering into Cambodia for development for these purposes, in agriculture and condo developments, etc. So the typical transaction for purchasing a co-owned building in Cambodia requires basically two documents. One is the sales and purchase agreement. This document has to be in the Khmer language. Now, because many of the purchasers are foreigner, we also create this document in the English language. However, only the Khmer version is registered with the Ministry of Land. They don't use the English version. But legally, the English and Khmer version would be applicable under Cambodian law. Okay? All sales and purchase of real property in Cambodia should have certification by a Cambodian lawyer or a notary. In many cases, if you were to sign a sale and purchase agreement outside of Cambodia, you can get a notary to witness on your agreements also. Okay. Does anyone have any questions before I go into taxation? Yes.
Here you are talking about purchasing of units. Let's say if I want to rent a unit, let's say retail space to operate food and beverage, F&B,
Yes.
do I need to get the tenancy agreement stamped by the local state council? Or?
Right, good question. No. However, if you were to rent a unit for office or rent a unit for residential, as a foreigner, that lease should be registered with the Sangkat or a notary public. The reason why is for residency is so that you can get a residence certificate to show that you can be in Cambodia, you're doing business. For a company, if you're using it as an office address, you also want to register it because you have to withhold 10% to pay to the government as far as taxes. So there is that requirement for registration as part of doing business, or unless you're saying, I'm only here in Cambodia, I'm not doing business. Then they'll say, why are you in Cambodia? Additionally, for leases, but it does not make the lease invalid if it's not registered. It's still a valid legal document. The only thing is if it's registered, then you're in compliance with taxation, etc. Leases that are 15 years plus have to be registered with the Ministry of Land. When it's registered with the Ministry of Land, they give you a certificate of long-term lease. This certificate of long-term lease is a valid collateral also. You can use it for mortgage, hypothecs, banks will take it. And in many cases, when you have a long-term lease on the property, whoever the owner is, they cannot sell their land or property. A lot of foreigners like to register their lease to protect their interests, especially if they have a trustee hold the property for them. Cambodia is also developing the trust law. So I think going to the future, you'll see a lot of maybe REITs coming out in Cambodia. Okay, so that will come out soon. Any other questions?
Are there any other questions from the audience? Well, I actually have one of my own.
Yes.
I was just wondering, you mentioned, excluding units on the ground floor. Is there any reason why units?
Yeah, when the law was created initially in 2011, foreigners can own 100% of the unit. If you look at the law on foreign ownership of co-owned building, it doesn't specifically mention 70%. It was initially created, I helped draft it with many other lawyers. And initially we said foreigners can own 100%. We didn't mention ground floor, but basically 100% of the units. Ministry of Economic Finance didn't like the idea so much. They changed it to 70%, and it cannot touch the ground. So what happened is a lot of developers are putting parking on the ground floor. Majority of them they're putting parking on the ground floor, or it's commercial lease. It's commercial lease. You can buy it if you want for 50 years, plus 50 years. So one other question is, if foreigners can only own 70%, what happens to the other 30% of the units available? As if you purchase condos in Thailand, you'll find that many of the condos are vacant. Not so vacant, but foreigners can only purchase 49%. Where in Cambodia is up to 70. So if you look at if you ask all of the real estates in Cambodia or developers, you'll find that Cambodians actually purchase a good 40 or 50% of the condos in Cambodia. If you compare what purchased from Taiwan, from Hong Kong, even from Singapore, a lot of Cambodians purchase not really to speculate. They purchase it for rental income. Many of the condo projects in Cambodia will have a management company put in place upon signing of your agreements. So when I mentioned there will be internal regulation and sale purchase agreement, there's actually another one. It's called the management and maintenance agreement. In many places, developer will have their own management company locked in for 5, 10 years or whatnot to make sure the project can go forward. There's no issues with regards to compliance, et cetera, because they do have to make sure that foreigners don't purchase 100%. If they do purchase more than 70%, when the Ministry of Land take a look at all your sale purchase agreement, they'll say, wait, I don't think you're compliant. Please change some of them to leasehold, or please sell them off to Cambodians. However, this issue has never happened, so. Any other questions? Yes.
Now, you make a good point that the developers in Cambodia, to get around the 70%, are using that ground floor to start with for something other than units. But the 70% is interesting as well in that it's as you know, it's 70% of the floor space. What we're finding in Cambodia is that developers are basically trying to make 30% of the unit space just not applicable for unit space anyway. So you'll use the ground floor, like Alan said, for car parks, whatnot, but then you'll try to make that, the common areas, so to speak, as big as possible to take up the 30%. So they are trying to design it in such a way that the units themselves only take up 70% of the building, in which case you can then sell them all to foreigners. Do you find that that's sort of what's going on now with most designs now? They're trying to sort of maximize the unit space to take up the whole 70%, and then there isn't this issue of having to get local buyers, so to speak?
I see more and more developers trying to actually reduce common area and maximize private area to sell more. But what you said about how they are trying to transition the space that cannot be sold to foreigner as common areas, there are some developers doing that. But in reality, because I represent a number of different developers, is they just don't care. They're focusing on private areas most of the time. So the ministry usually looks at it very carefully before they approve a project to make sure, health, safety, etc., everything's in line. And then any changes to the development would be updated with the ministry. That's why for projects that are existing, they have already been approved. But for projects that are not completed, you'll find variations in terms of space, which can vary between 3 to 5% usually. I'm sure if you purchase condos in Cambodia, you've seen the sale and purchase agreements. They'll mention the variation. So these variations theoretically should be updated with the Ministry of Land, and that usually factors out when or comes out to play when you're issuing and releasing the title deeds. Okay. Any other questions?
I understand this. You mentioned this refers to condominium units.
Yes.
So what about like offices, retail units?
Right. So in Cambodia, the law on co-owned building does not only apply to resident. It also applies to office space. So it's mixed use. There's Soho developments you've seen in other projects. The law does not specifically say it has to be for residential. Currently, the office market is just starting to develop. There's actually very limited, supply of office space for sale. It is a lucrative business. And also, even service resident. You will probably find many development projects saying the owner will manage it for you, but it's not a service resident. There's no food service, laundry, etc. They'll buy it, you furnish it, and then they can rent it for you if you ask them to. Most of the projects are like that. I think the project we have here today is where they already set up the full infrastructure, and at the end of the day, you just get a check after they cut their management fee. The same with offices. It's the supply is very limited, and I believe there's a Singaporean brand, Somerset, doing residence management already in Cambodia. So we're also seeing a lot of Singaporean business come into Cambodia because there's a growing demand for these type of high-level services. Okay, so I can move on to the next slide.
Yeah, please, sir.
Okay. So briefly about tax, actually, I'll have to update this because just recently, about a week or so ago, Cambodia has a double taxation treaty agreement with Singapore. So Singaporeans do not have to pay 14% tax for remittance, for foreign remittance. It's now been decreased to 10%. What does that mean? This would apply to a purchaser of a foreign purchaser, whereas you purchase the unit, you let the management company lease it out for you, or you lease it yourself. When you have to remit the money, the income from the lease overseas, you only need to withhold 10%, not 14% anymore. This 10% withholding tax applies to Cambodians. Before, foreigners were 14, now they decrease it to 10. So it's the same as if you're a Cambodian national with regards to withholding tax. Okay, what type of taxes can you look into when you're purchasing? There will be 10% VAT on the sale of the condo. Now, if the developer is a company, there will be VAT on the sale of the condo. If the developer is an individual, there may or may not be VAT. Okay? When you transfer property in Cambodia, especially property that are freehold, whether strata title, whether property that are landed, registered with the Ministry of Land, it requires a 4% stamp duty for the transfer. The 4% stamp duty is usually paid in the process of the transfer. Other taxes applicable is property tax. So when you purchase your condo, you will have to take care of your property tax, which is once a year. It is 0.1% per annum. You take a discount of $25,000 off your land value. Then the balance is 0.1%. Now, property tax is not actually based on the value of your unit. It does not fluctuate with the market. The Ministry of Land actually, or Ministry of Economic Finance, has their own index for what your unit would cost in what area. Usually the price is maybe half of the actual value. Okay, again, if you're looking to buy for capital appreciation, there is no capital gains tax. Now, you can buy as a company or as an individual. I recommend buying as an individual, so of course there's no capital gains tax. If you buy as a company, you have to pay 20% tax on profit, or 1% of your revenue. Even though there's no capital gains, it'll come out somewhere when you're declaring profits or dividends to take back. Okay. Any questions on taxation? Okay, so I think let's go one more. Regarding banking, I'm sure most foreigners, actually, they don't like to borrow money in Cambodia. The interest rate is quite high. Usually, like Maybank's offering 9%. Many foreigners would leverage in their own country, take the lower interest rate, and then purchase it overseas. Maybank would allow this type of leverage, but if you were to borrow from Maybank in Cambodia, it's 9%, which is quite high, but that is actually the rate that local Cambodians are paying. Okay. Creating a bank account to receive the income from your lease is quite easy. Most banks just need a passport, and as long as it's valid for at least 6 months, you can create a bank account. Some banks require additional proof of ownership of property or lease agreement or business, residence certificate, etc. However, Canadian Bank, which is supporting some of the projects, they also do a lot of development. They just need a passport, and they'll create the bank for you, and then they can remit the funds for you. Any questions about this?
With regards to financing, is it easy to get financing from Singapore banks for Cambodian property?
Actually, for Singapore banks, I cannot say, but Cambodian banks, yes. Cambodian banks support both local and foreigners to obtain financing, usually up to 70% of the value of the unit based on their own criteria. Usually banks work with developer from the beginning to support the whole project. They don't like to share the end users going to other banks. And usually they have an agreement where, okay, the bank will support the project, help split the title. So usually buyers are more confident when banks are splitting instead of developers splitting themselves. And also, when you mortgage the property, the bank has already helped you split, so they'll keep it to mortgage it. Okay? Yes?
Is there such a thing as refinancing after, say, a period of 5 years when the property has appreciated, if you buy it correctly?
Actually, for banks, they don't restrict refinancing, but it depends on the market, right? Depend on the supply and demand. Banks usually will loan to a developer if they have a cooperation with the developer. They usually have an understanding, then banks will provide. Now, however, if you want to take your title deed back and go to another bank, most of the banks are okay, most of the international banks. The local banks might frown and say, why are you taking my business away? But most of the banks have no issue for strata title. Once the strata title is out, legally the banks cannot hold onto your title deed. However, in practice, they don't want you to mortgage a second time, so they're going to keep it. Which is why a lot of foreigners buy in, prefer to leverage in their own country, get a loan to buy it overseas. Okay.
Do we have any more questions?
Okay, so if no more questions, well, this is my contact. Our office, again, is in New York, Cambodia, Seychelles. We're actually considering Singapore, but we'll see. And my email's there. If you have any legal questions or tax, feel free to send me an email. Okay, thank you.